3 months ago, I was standing in the back office of an authorized dealer in Sydney, watching the manager work a loop across the bezel of a submariner that had come in for service. He spent 4 minutes on the ceramic insert, 2 more on the bracelet end links. Then he set the watch down on the velvet pad, looked up at his assistant, and said something I haven't been able to shake since. He said honestly, on a busy day, he'd take this one to the back and book it in. He wouldn't catch it. The watch was a clean factory superclone, a fake Rolex submariner so convincing that the customer had walked in believing it was the genuine piece his uncle had owned for 20 years. That conversation is what the watch press is still calling Rolex's authentication arms race. But the people inside the distribution chain stopped using that phrase some time ago. They stopped because Rolex did. And once you start tracking the evidence of when Rolex quietly conceded the authentication war, it's sitting in plain view. 3 corporate moves between 2022 and 2025 that the watch media has covered as separate news cycles, but which are, in retrospect, obviously the same strategy. This isn't a story about how good the fakes have become. It's a story about a brand that stopped trying to authenticate watches and started authenticating buyers instead. The conventional reading of the past 3 years goes like this. Chinese factories, primarily Clean Factory, VS Factory, and the workshop circuits operating out of Guangzhou and Shenzhen have closed the visual and mechanical gap on Rolex sport models to sub-micron tolerances. Movement clones now use the correct alloy specifications, the correct synthetic lubricants, and in several documented cases, the correct caliber architecture. Independent watchmakers have publicly admitted on record at trade events including Watches and Wonders that without case-back inspection and movement reference cross-checks, they can't reliably separate a current generation Clean Factory submariner from a genuine submariner under boutique lighting. The industry assumption was that Rolex would answer with hardened authentication, holograms, micro-etching, public serial verification, and anti-counterfeit technology embedded in the watch itself. Look at what Rolex has actually spent the 4-year war chest on. The answer is essentially nothing. No public-facing authentication tool, no consumer verification app, there is no blockchain serialization, no NFC tag, and no in-house verification service available to a buyer who walks into a service center with a watch and a question. And to be precise about what that absence means, you have to understand what Rolex did implement. After 2007, Rolex added rehoud engraving, the reference and serial number laser etched into the inner bezel ring between the dial and the crystal. They added the laser etched crown, the LEC, at 6 o'clock on the crystal, visible under magnification. These are real anti-counterfeit measures, and for a window of time, they worked. The problem is that current generation superclones have both. The rehoud engraving is there, the LEC crown is there. Neither feature is now, in practice, a reliable consumer-facing authentication differentiator. Rolex implemented authentication features into the watch, the factories absorbed them, and Rolex did not escalate. That absence of escalation is not an oversight, that absence is the entire story. The first move, December 2022, Rolex launches its certified pre-owned program through Bucherer. The press releases framed it as a consumer protection initiative. Read the actual mechanics. A Rolex is certified only if it re-enters the Rolex ecosystem through a participating authorized retailer, is checked against Rolex's own internal production records, including the full reference and serial number history, and is sealed with a Rolex-issued tag and a 2-year international warranty. The program doesn't offer a verification service for watches in private hands. It doesn't certify a submariner you bought from a private seller, an estate sale, or a non-participating retailer. It certifies only watches that have been pulled back into the controlled distribution channel. For context, Richemont had already signaled where the industry was heading when it acquired Watchfinder in 2018, building a certified pre-owned pipeline for its own brands, including Cartier. Rolex's CPO move, 4 years later, wasn't an innovation. It was a consolidation. Rolex can't verify a watch in the wild, so they built a system that quietly removes the wild from the question. By mid-2024, the CPO program had rolled out globally across Bucherer's network and a tier of approved third-party retailers. Every watch outside that pipeline, by deliberate omission, has no verification path. The second move, August 2023, Rolex acquires Bucherer outright. Bucherer is the single largest Rolex retailer in the world, a Swiss distribution business with more than 100 years of dealer history, the deepest Rolex-certified pre-owned inventory on the planet, and roughly 100 boutiques across 7 countries including Europe, the United States, and Asia. The transaction was estimated in the range of 3 billion Swiss francs. The press coverage framed the deal as succession planning. Jörg Bucherer had no direct heir, and the transaction ensured the business would continue under stable ownership. That framing is not wrong, it is just incomplete. What Rolex bought, in structural terms, was outright vertical control over its highest volume distribution node and the largest certified secondary market channel in the industry in a single transaction. They no longer have to convince a retailer to enforce authentication standards. They own the retailer. Before 2023, the number of boutiques operated under Rolex's direct ownership was 0. Today, it is roughly 100. The third move is less a single decision and more a tightening pattern over the same window. The waitlist for current production sport models, the Submariner, the GMT Master 2, the Daytona, is no longer a queue in any meaningful sense. It's a buyer profile system. Authorized dealers have always exercised discretion on allocation, but the criteria have hardened to the point of explicit policy. A sport allocation in 2026 typically requires a documented purchase history with the boutique, often with a specific dollar threshold of prior Rolex purchases, a long-term relationship measured in years, and in multiple reported cases, an informal check of the buyer's public social media presence. The watch is allocated to a known buyer. The watch itself is, almost as a footnote, what changes hands. What's being verified at the point of sale isn't the steel and the movement and the Cerachrome bezel. What's being verified is the human holding the steel. And this is the part that matters if you're sitting on the other side of the counter or thinking about being on it. The dealer in Sydney wasn't telling me a confession. He was telling me a market structure. The Rolex you can authenticate easily, the Rolex with the unbroken chain of custody, is the one that came through an authorized dealer to a known buyer and stayed inside the controlled ecosystem. Every other Rolex, the eBay piece, the inheritance watch, the gray market import, the watch sitting in a drawer that hasn't had paperwork since 1993, is, from Rolex's strategic perspective, an ambient object. The brand is no longer competing in that market. They have ceded it. The strongest piece of evidence for this position is the absence at the center of it. In 4 years of major strategic announcements covering 2 acquisitions, a new global production facility planned for Bucherer, Switzerland, scheduled for completion around 2029, the Bucherer takeover, and the certified pre-owned rollout, Rolex has issued no public-facing authentication technology. No app, no serial lookup portal, no QR code on the warranty card, no NFC layer in the bracelet clasp, no COSC chronometer verification pathway integrated into a consumer tool. The single most valuable independent luxury watch brand on earth, in the middle of the most sophisticated counterfeit crisis in its history, has spent essentially 0 on consumer-side verification. That is not an oversight, that is a position. The dealer in Sydney told me he would not catch the clean factory if it came in on a busy Tuesday. 3 months later, I do not think he was admitting a failure of his own expertise. I think he was describing accurately the market Rolex has chosen to operate in. The watches inside the controlled distribution are verified by their pathway. The watches outside it are not Rolex's problem. The war the watch press is still narrating has been over for some time. The brand walked off the field.